blazing vehicles set alight.
We woke up every morning to a news report that it was a bombing or a shooting.
Petrol bomb attacks on shops have been condemned as senseless acts of violence.
There was such an appetite and such a want for people in Northern Ireland to say there's going to be no more.
25 years ago, a historic deal brought peace to Northern Ireland, saving thousands of lives.
Today, I hope that the burden of history can at long last start to be lifted from our shoulders.
I can still see the document in my head now when we're speaking.
You could feel a weight collectively lifting from society.
But a generation later, how well is the Good Friday Agreement still working?
A peace agreement is not a fairy story. You don't get to live happily ever after.
The security service, MI5, today raised the terror threat in Northern Ireland to severe.
There is this glorification of violence, of the violence of the past.
It's younger people who have decided to take on that trauma for themselves and decided that's our war.
What needs to be done to preserve the hard-won peace?
The best way to keep the peace is to make sure that people have a job, that they have something that they're contributing to that's bigger than them.
And does the price of peace have to be bad government?
There has been this lurching instability. Stormont is up, then it's down. For a population that has grown up in peace, they want something better, and they are the people who are increasingly pushing for change.
Belfast's Titanic Quarter, a tech and tourism hub. Blockbuster fantasy drama Game of Thrones was shot here, and attractions like the Titanic Centre welcome hundreds of thousands of people every year. None of this would have been possible without the Good Friday Agreement.
It was a piece of high politics, but actually it has transformed Northern Irish society. It has meant that, for instance, the architecture is different in Belfast. There are lots of glass buildings, something which would have been madness during the Troubles because bombs were going off. There's more inward investment, there are better jobs. This has had a practical impact on people's lives in ways that lots of people in Northern Ireland don't necessarily think about.
So how did the Good Friday Agreement achieve this transformation? Well, to understand that, you need to go back to 1921, when the border was drawn by the British. It gave most of Ireland independence, but meant 6 northern counties remained part of the UK. Most people here were Protestants who supported the Union, and the system was designed to work in their favour. The police were 90% Protestant, as were most judges, and the government was majority rule, meaning unionists would always be in control. In the 1960s, inspired by the American civil rights movement, some Catholics began demanding change, and the violence they met, from loyalists intent on keeping Northern Ireland under unionist control, the police and the British Army, helped spark the 30 years of conflict known as the Troubles.
For the entirety of its existence in Northern Ireland, the Catholics had never been allowed any power. So the point of the agreement, Good Friday Agreement, was to have power sharing, so the minority Catholics could participate in government.
The agreement promised to reform the police, overhaul the justice system, and create a totally new form of government, which meant no community could dominate another. It was an unprecedented achievement. Jonathan Powell was the British government's chief negotiator.
We were negotiating for 3 days and nights without sleep, essentially. People were getting slightly hysterical. The truth was we could have lost it at any period. It took another 9 years of negotiation to get the institutions up and running and get the agreement fully implemented.
In the decade after 1998, paramilitaries decommissioned their weapons, and the deal protected the delicate issue of identity. People here could now choose to be British, Irish, or both. And it was written into the agreement that Northern Ireland's place in the UK would only change if the majority of people here wanted it to.
The Troubles had been going on for so long, they appeared intractable, something that just was always going to be a problem and was insoluble. And the Good Friday Agreement transformed that.
The impact was remarkable. At the height of the Troubles, over 200 people were being killed every year. But it is now closer to 20.
The Good Friday Belfast Agreement is a symbol of peace still around the world. Have we finished it? Absolutely not. But in terms of large-scale violence, in terms of those images, the fact that there's not people being murdered every day, then that's a huge success.
But there was one event the architects of the agreement could not have predicted.
Brexit! We've got our country back!
When the UK voted to leave the EU in 2016, the status of Northern Ireland became fiercely contentious.
No borders, no barriers, no Brexit!
No border! No Brexit!
To avoid a hard border within Ireland, Prime Minister Boris Johnson proposed a trade border in the Irish Sea. This angered unionists, who saw it as a barrier between Northern Ireland and the rest of the UK.
It did add to polarisation here because a large part of the unionist community voted to leave, a large part of the nationalist community voted to remain, and Northern Ireland, 56% of people voted to remain in it. So it was a sense of a loss of identity that was being taken off people, and I suspect that it will continue to be hard to disentangle that vote from the future prospects of this place.
Borders, no Boris, no Brexit!
What Boris Johnson really individually managed to do was get the issue of identity back into politics, which is extremely dangerous in Northern Ireland.
This tenser atmosphere has made it harder to heal the grievances of the past. And some believe the nature of the Good Friday Agreement itself means it's impossible to move on.
We're just going up here to my wee homestead in Leganani in rural County Down.
Sammy Heenan was just 12 years old when his father was killed by the Irish Republican Army, the IRA, in 1985. He was alone with him in their remote farmhouse at the time.
A lone gunman who'd been hiding behind a wall shot Mr. Heenan once in the head from point blank.
So I just followed the trail of blood around the side of the barn, along here, and as I came round the corner, my father was lying dead at this point. And I just stood over him and I just looked and I started to sob and cry because I did not know what else to do. All I could do then was run down the street and down half a mile down the road to a neighbour's house to raise the alarm.
No one was ever tried for the murder of Sammy's father. And under the terms of the agreement, if anyone were to be convicted, they would only serve 2 years.
That was the earthquake for victims. And I feel that we have been suffering the aftershocks ever since.
The agreement also meant that paramilitary prisoners were released.
The man coming through the turnstile at the maze is Bernard McGinn, IRA sniper and bomb maker.
Even those serving life sentences for attacks during the Troubles. For Sammy, this felt like an insult to his father's memory.
I think victims have felt let down and very much betrayed as a consequence.
And he believes this has led some of the next generation to romanticise the conflict.
We're supposed to be in a new era of inclusivity and respect between our two traditions. But sadly today, there's many young people who have a very glorified narrative around the troubles of our past.
Sectarian violence remains a problem here. The UK recently upgraded the threat level in Northern Ireland because of ongoing attacks, including the shooting of policeman John Caldwell.
Wearing masks and armed with a gun, they fired several shots at him in front of his son.
Sammy has been helping the children who were there that day.
I totally empathise with them young people when I spoke to them because I could feel the pain and it brought me back when I was a 12-year-old boy.
But this is very different from the violence of the 1980s.
The violence that happens now does not have political support. The reason we had to negotiate with Sinn Féin in the end was, even at the height of the Troubles, they had genuine support. These fractional groups we're dealing with now have no support. Less than 1,000 people would even sympathise with what they're doing. This is not a political issue, that's a criminal issue that needs to be dealt with.
Thanks to the Good Friday Agreement, many community groups have been established to try to tackle the problem of sectarianism. This is Peace Players in North Belfast.
It's really hard to actually talk to someone from a different religion because it's kind of frowned upon to mix.
I went to a Protestant school, and coming here I was a wee bit scared of the integration.
Society here remains deeply segregated. The children at this game go to separate Catholic and Protestant schools, like almost all kids in Northern Ireland. In fact, just 9% of post-primary pupils attend integrated schools, and 90% of social housing is also segregated.
There's still a lot of conflict between the areas. As a Catholic girl, walking into places like the Shankle Estate is like a really scary thing to do. There's a lot of times where you just go into an area and someone catches wind that or they recognise you from the other side and they'll verbally or physically attack you, and it is quite like a really scary thing.
And there are other, more obvious emblems of division, like the peace walls that separate Catholic and Protestant communities.
The barriers still exist, the divisions are still there. We still have peace lines in Belfast which are dominating the skyline and keeping our traditions apart. The Good Friday Agreement created lots of opportunities for lots of projects like Peace Players to be able to happen. But also I think there's still a journey to be travelled.
Hello, I'm Patrick Lane. I'm the Economist's Deputy Digital Editor. If you want to read more of our Northern Ireland coverage, why not take out a subscription to The Economist? You'll receive daily and weekly analysis of global affairs. You can read us online or in the app, and you can listen to our audio edition. For the best offer, click on the link. And now, back to the film.
This isn't just about peace walls, though. The bigger problem is that since the Good Friday Agreement, there hasn't been stable government long enough to give people paths out of violence. Saoirse Eastwood represents Lagan Valley, just outside Belfast, in the devolved Stormont Assembly.
One thing that I would like to see more of is actually investment in our town. Jobs for our young people, apprenticeships and stuff like that. That all sounds really normal, but for some reason we can't manage to get it together to actually enable people like me to deliver that for my constituents.
Under the terms of power sharing set up after 1998, Unionists and Nationalists must govern together. And if either side walks away, the government collapses.
It's a bit like Donald Trump and Joe Biden being asked to govern together. It is a system of mutual vetoes, of almost mutually assured destruction, but the ultimate nuclear option here is for one of those big parties to walk away.
Both sides have pulled the system down in the past. The Assembly has collapsed 6 times since 1998, leaving Northern Ireland without a government for almost 10 years. This time, the Democratic Unionist Party, or DUP, has walked out over post-Brexit negotiations.
We are totally opposed to the protocol as it presently exists. We will neither accept it, nor will we work it.
Without an assembly, we can't do anything, and I can see the decisions stacking up day after day after day, and looking at it and going, this is not right.
This political paralysis has hit public services. In 2020, 40% of people on National Health Service waiting lists in Northern Ireland had been waiting over a year for an appointment, compared with just 0.1% of people in England.
We have a situation where, perversely, people are no longer dying because of bullets and bombs for the most part, but they are dying because good government is not happening.
The way the Assembly works is also out of step with how people are voting. Centrist parties, not defined by being unionist or nationalist, are gaining ground. Saoirse's party, Alliance, is now the 3rd largest in the Assembly.
We weren't, I don't want to say burdened, but we certainly were not coming at our politics from a main driver of a constitutional endgame.
But because Alliance is neither unionist nor nationalist, their votes don't count.
The rules that were drawn up in 1998 were there to protect unionism and nationalism from bad behaviour, essentially, by one or the other. It didn't really force the idea that there might be a third tribe. When it comes to a big vote in the Assembly on something like the budget, the key thing is getting a majority of unionists, a majority of nationalists, and others don't count. That's a significant problem now, where others are a significant force in Northern Irish politics.
Alliance are now campaigning for reform of the system.
We are simply asking that those very modest reforms to the Good Friday Agreement could enable us to unlock so much peace and potential and prosperity and fairness, ultimately.
The stakes for getting this right could not be higher. The generation born after the Troubles are asking for more than just peace.
We don't have a government system that actually is set in stone and is working for the future. I don't think I'm really staying in Northern Ireland.
And if reform is done right, there is remarkable potential here.
I'm long-term very optimistic. I think the Good Friday Agreement has essentially worked, and that's not true of many peace agreements. I think Northern Ireland's got huge possibilities economically, having this advantage of being in the European market and the British market, educated labour force, relatively low housing prices. If we can sort out the political instability, the future of Northern Ireland is fantastic.
The challenge now is how to harness the ambition of 1998 to create a more stable political system, one that will support the next 25 years of peace.
I'm Sam McBride and I write about Northern Ireland for The Economist. To read more on this topic, click the link. Thanks for watching and don't forget to subscribe.